Today we're going to look at several more constructions. These are involved specifically with looking at perpendicular and parallel lines. So do keep in mind, if you need to go back and review, you can absolutely still see the videos that were shared in Unit 2. Just go to the Materials folder and open up the Unit 2 folder that is going to be grayed out. It may be towards the end of the list of your possible folders. So our first construction we're looking at is perpendicular bisector. So again, perpendicular meaning we're making something that is going to make a 90-degree angle with whatever our starting object was, and bisector being something that cuts it in half. So technically, when we construct these for a perpendicular bisector, if we have our starting segment, we're going to be constructing that looks something like this, but it is going to be perfectly in the middle. When I just sketch it out by hand, I don't know if I'm exactly in the middle, but by using my compass and straight edge, that I know I will be. So for both of these, again, I'm starting with a straight line or straight segment exactly that I used a straight edge to draw to ensure that it's a nice straight line. Again, when I draw it by hand, you'll notice I have some little wiggling going on. Okay, so when you do perpendicular bisector, again, we're trying to hit exactly that middle point and make sure that we have a perfectly perpendicular line. Now, the neat thing about a perpendicular bisector is that if you pick any point that's on that line, it's actually going to be the same distance away from the two endpoints. So that's the big thing that I'm going to use when I do this construction. So you take your compass. Again, I'm going to use one of the slider compasses, but you can check out the videos that are on the reference sheet that you can look at. And those will link to some animated videos that are using your more old school compass with the two different branches, kind of looks like a triangle. Okay, so our first step is we're going to take our center of our compass, make sure it's centered right over our point. And then I want to draw an arc that's going to be a little bit past the halfway point. Now, I could actually draw this all the way over to the end, but that's going to make my arcs really, really big, and it's going to take up a lot of space on my paper. So I just want to make sure I'm past the halfway point, and I'm about there. So I'm going to draw an arc. Now, in the videos that I give you, it says to actually draw an arc at the top and an arc at the bottom, but I just like to draw one big arc that I don't have to take up my pencil or my pen. And then I'm ensured that I'm keeping it a little bit more even. Now, I want to draw exactly the same sized arc from the other side. And again, without changing the width of my compass. Again, center your compass over the other part. So crosshairs right over that point. Hold it down. Make sure you're using the same hole that you were before and draw another arc. Now again, it should go top and bottom with your intersections. And again, if you're drawing too heavily, or if you're putting too much pressure on your slider compass, you'll notice I got a little bit off base on this one. Now, if it's a little bit, that's okay. But if you're going too far off, then you're probably going to want to erase your pencil marks and start over again to make sure that you have this nice and exact. Okay, so I have two intersection points here, and all I'm going to do is draw a straight line that goes between them. So I'm using the straight edge because I want to get this exactly as exact as possible. And so there's my perfect right angle. It looks perfectly perpendicular, and I can even measure it as well. And most of these slider compasses have a little protractor at the end, and I'm going exactly through that 90 mark. So I know I did this perfectly. So let's try another one. So again, same segment, it looks like it's about the same length, but I tilted it the other way because sometimes your drawings are going to be tilted around. You're not going to always have something that's nice and flat to draw from. So same scenario, I want to line up my compass, center of it over one of my endpoints, hold it steady, make sure that your compass is pulled a little far out. I'm going to show you what happens if I pull it all the way out to the other endpoint. And again, you don't need to go all the way out, but you also don't want to be close in either. You want to be past the halfway point, but you could go all the way to the end if you want to. So again, make sure he's lined up that you can see that point perfectly through the hole. I'm going to draw one arc from this side. Notice when I go to the end point, it takes up a lot of room, but this is still going to work. Okay, then center on the other point, hold it down, draw my arc so it intersects both top and bottom. I also know that my arc is pretty good because I'm going through that end point. Although I could be a little more exact, I kind of hit just on the outside of it. But I still have my top point and just barely down on the bottom, I have my 2 intersection points. So connect the X marks the spot. And there's my perpendicular angle. Again, looks perfectly 90 degrees. So again, as long as you're past the halfway point, you'll get your 2 intersection points. If you find that your 2 arcs are not intersecting, that means you had your compass a little bit too close from your starting point and you want to spread out your compass a little bit. Okay, second construction we're going to do is now we're going to look at parallel lines. So parallel lines we talked about in our previous video. They are lines that are never going to intersect each other. So you've talked about them before and you started looking at angles last time, but we're actually going to use one of those principles that you thought about last class with the different pairs of angles. So first thing is I have my line and I'm going to make a parallel line through this point, and I can't just draw it straight out because I don't know if I'm going to get the angle perfect. I'm going to cheat this a little bit, but it's not really cheating. So remember when we talked about corresponding angles last class? So when we have parallel lines, our corresponding angles are going to be in the same position. So like both at the top right of that intersection or both at the top left. So I'm going to use that principle and actually combine this with a construction we did before. So we before did copying an angle. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create an angle down towards the bottom with that bottom line. And then I'm going to copy it up so it goes through the vertex up at the top. And that's by default going to make congruent angles. So the first thing I need to do is draw a transversal that goes through this point. Now it doesn't have to go through this point that I have on the line. I'm actually going to draw it so it doesn't. And doesn't need to. I got kind of close to that point. So again, I'm doing a hand-drawn version, but if you were doing this on your own with pencil, I would definitely have redrawn that line. So here's our point that we're going to use. So I'm going to copy this angle down here. So I have it up here. Now I've got a lot more room down here than I do above this line. So I'm actually going to go ahead and extend my line a little bit. Because again, lines go on forever and ever. So it doesn't matter if you extend it, as long as you're keeping it straight. Okay, so to copy an angle before, what we did was, actually let me crease this so it won't move around on me. Okay, what we did before is we started by drawing an arc that hit both sides of our angle. So we center our compass right at the vertex on that bottom angle that we now made. Now, when I draw my arc, I don't want this to be super big. I definitely want it to be closer in than the point I'm trying to go through for my parallel line. And I'm also thinking about, well, I don't have a huge amount of space up here, so I kind of want to keep that distance in mind when I'm setting my arc down here. So I'm going to set my compass so it's a little bit closer. I'm going to draw my arc. And then just like when we were copying angles, I'm going to draw exactly the same arc, take my compass, move the center piece up to that point that we had our line, our transversal drawn through. Actually, I have to move my paper down a little bit. And I'm going to draw exactly the same size arc. So you'll notice I did not touch the width of my compass at all. Alrighty, so my next piece is now I have my angle. I need to measure this length and mark it off on this one. So because I have this point up top here, that's where I'm going to center my compass at. So center your compass at the top intersection point on your bottom angle, and then you're going to look for this intersection point in the whole of your compass. Or if you're using one of those old school compasses, pointy end goes at the top, pencil end goes down at the bottom. So this is the mark that I'm going to transfer. So I'm going to move the center of my compass up to my new intersection point that I created and mark off that same distance. There we go. X marks the spot. So my parallel line is going to have to go through these 2 points, connect them together, and we have a pretty darn perfect parallel line. So here are my 2 parallel lines that I created. Okay, sometimes you're not going to have a whole lot of room to work with. and sometimes things are going to be twisted around a little weird. So let me show you one that looks a little different. So again, you'll notice when I did this first one, I started by drawing my transversal. I didn't have to go through this point. So I'm not going to try to go through this point. I'm actually going to do this one backwards. So I'm going to construct this one this way. So I'm going to go backwards. So if I have anyone who's left-handed, this one might actually be a little easier for you to work. And we could have, if we wanted to on this, drawn our transversal so it went like this, and we could have done that whole construction left-handed if we wanted to. It's all about constructing your corresponding angles. So we start with our transversal. Again, you can go through any point on the line, but it has to go through the point that they gave you. Again, I'm going to extend it as far as I can so I can get lots of working room up at the top. So I'm going to even extend that a little further. Now, if you print up the practice page that I'm going to provide, it's okay if you go outside the lines on these. Just keep in mind, eventually when you do these constructions on the SOL, you're going to be kind of limited by the size of the screen. So you want to think about how you're setting up your constructions when we look at those. Okay, I need to copy this angle up top. Again, I don't want to set my compass super wide. I want to set it so it comes below the point. And also keep in mind how much distance I have available to work with up here. So center your compass at the vertex on that bottom angle. I'm going to put it a little bit closer because I don't need a huge amount of working room on this. Again, hold it steady. Draw your arc so it hits both sides of that angle you made. And then you're going to do not change your compass. Pick it up, transfer it to that top point, hold it steady, draw another arc. Let me move my paper down for a sec. Draw another arc. Again, don't put a whole lot of pressure. If you're using one of these slider compasses, or even if you're using one of the old school compasses, don't put a huge amount of pressure on it. That's what's going to move your arcs around and make them so they're not quite as exact. So now we need to measure this distance between these two intersection points. So again, I'll notice on my top angle, I only have one intersection point to work with. So that's where I want to center my compass when I'm measuring. So center it on your point. Look for this intersection point in the hole. So here we go. Wouldn't be a bad idea to draw a little arc just to make sure you hit it exactly. And I did. So then just take that, do not change the width of your compass. Draw another arc so it intersects that measurement arc that you used before. X marks the spot. So again, our original point was here. Our new intersection point is here. So those are the two that I want to connect to make a straight line. And lo and behold, there's my parallel line to my original. Awesome. Again, rewind, watch this as many times as you need to. But again, seeing these step by step can help. And don't forget, you can actually slow down this video if you need to rewatch. Okay, two more constructions. So we did a perpendicular bisector. We did make a parallel line through a point by copying an angle. So our last two constructions that we're going to look at are actually both making perpendiculars. However, we have two scenarios. We're going to make a perpendicular that goes through a point that's sitting off the line. And then we're going to do a perpendicular through a point sitting right on the line. So our first one to check out, perpendicular through an external point, through a separate point that's not on the line. So we're actually going to force this to be just like the perpendicular bisector we started with. Here's the kicker though. We need to know what endpoints to use. Right now we have a line. Well, that's not going to help us out. We need to have endpoints on it. But if we want to force this to be on that perpendicular bisector, right smack through the middle of whatever segment, we want to make sure that we measure out that same distance. So actually, to go back to the sketch we had before, when we think about our perpendicular bisector, any point has to be the same distance away. Well, they gave us the point for this new construction. We have to figure out those same distances before we can keep going. So we do that by setting our compass right at that top point. And then we want to draw arcs that hit either side of that line. Now, if we do this with our compass though, we're going to ensure that no matter what, both sides is going to hit the same length. Now I want to make sure that I have a mark on either side, but if I set it too wide, I'm going to miss the line. So I'm going to try to set it, again, it looks like it's going to hit the line now. And so I'm going to draw an arc on the right and another arc on the left. And if you wanted to, you could just draw one big arc if you don't want to pick up your pencil in the middle. The key is we need these 2 points. And then we're just going to run exactly the same steps that we did for perpendicular bisector at the beginning of this video. So set your compass at one endpoint. Set the width of your compass so it's past the halfway point, so maybe somewhere in here. We're going to draw an arc down here. Again, you could draw a great big arc all the way top and bottom if you wanted. Don't change the width. Move it over to the other side. Anchor it down. Draw your arc. Again, your goal is to hit that first arc you just drew. X marks the spot. So then if you connect those 2 points, we should have a perfect perpendicular line going through that top point. And there we go. I can even check it with my little protractor at the end and line it up at the center. And I go right through the 90-degree mark. Let's do another one, but I put the point on the bottom of the line. That doesn't matter. So even though it's tilted, and even though my point is below instead of above, I can still do this problem. Now, if you're working on a piece of paper, I could literally just take my paper and twist it around and look at it from the other perspective. But you can't do that if you're doing these on the computer. So I want to show you if it's, right side just the way I drew it. So first step is, again, we need to mark off equal distances. And, I'm worried that maybe I don't have as much room over here. So there's nothing wrong with just extending the line. If you want more room to work with, then do it. Lines can go on forever and ever. As long as you keep it nice and straight, you're good to go. Okay, center your compass right at the point they gave you. We want to set our compass so we can hit a point on the left and we can hit a point on the right or above and below, however you want to look at it. So I think that one will work. So there's one on this side and one on this side. Again, I could make one big arc if I wanted to. But now I have my 2 endpoints. And so now I'm going to run my perpendicular bisector steps like we did at the beginning of the video. So again, set your compass at one of your endpoints. Make sure your compass is going past the halfway point, so past as far or as close as you want, as long as it's more than halfway. I'm going to draw an arc from the left-hand side. And again, I could draw one big arc if I wanted to. I'm not going to in this case. Move or recenter your compass without changing the width. Center it over, hold it steady. X marks the spot. And so connect the point they wanted you to originally go through. Connect it with your new intersection that you found. And we are at perfect 90-degree angles on both of these. Alrighty, our last construction is, well, what happens if they give us the line, but they put the point on the line and we want to do the construction? So let me actually fold this over. This will work better. So our last construction, perpendicular from a point on the line. So we need to do the same thing. We know where we want to force our perpendicular bisector to go through, but we need endpoints to be able to do the construction. So same kind of thing as we did before. I'm going to use my compass to mark off even distances, one on the left and one on the right. I just need to make sure that I'm hitting those points. So here's my one section, and then I'm going to go over to the other side, and oh no, I'm just barely past that line. So what am I going to do? Well, it's a line, so extend it. As long as you keep it nice and straight, this is still going to be a workable construction. So now I have my 2 endpoints that I want to do my perpendicular bisector between. So set it at one intersection point. Make sure your compass is a little further than halfway. Right now it's right at the center because that's how we drew it. So because it's right at the center, I need to widen it a little bit. Then draw an arc, at least one arc. I like to do 2 on this one. And again, nothing wrong with drawing a great big arc on this. Go for it. Gives you more points that you can connect to make sure that you're correct. Recenter on the other side, but again, don't change the width of your compass. One arc above, one arc below. And again, if you want to draw one big arc, you can. The biggest thing is when I draw one arc above, one arc below, I actually have 3 points that I can connect. And so if all 3 of these points are in a perfect line, I know I did my construction perfectly. And so if I connect these, lo and behold, all in a perfect straight line. So I know my perpendicular is perfect. Okay, last construction. Except the point they want us to use is all the way on the end. So what should I do first to make sure that I'm set up okay? Yeah, let's go ahead and extend our line, give ourselves some more room to work. We don't have to try to make this teeny tiny construction. Just extend your line a little bit. Just make sure you're very careful on lining it up to make sure you have a perfectly drawn straight line. Do not eyeball it. Do not draw that by hand. So then let's go through our steps. We need to mark one above, one below, same distance away. I'm going to measure it out on this one just so I don't run out of room again. Center it right at the point they gave us. I'm going to move my compass in a little bit because I need a little bit less room. Mark one end on this side, flip it around, mark the other one on the other side. I just barely made it with my length. Ooh, what did I do? Those do not look the same. So what should we do if that happens? Well, let's double check our lengths. Okay, let me center my point again. So when I drew this arc, I was on this hole. But when I drew this one, oh, I was on the outside hole. So I just need to redraw it. I haven't moved my compass, so I know it's still set properly. And now I'll have the correct length. So I want to ignore this one. I want to use the one that's closer in. So then, perpendicular bisector. Again, set it at one end point. Make sure you're past the halfway, past the midpoint. Again, draw at least one arc, but I like to do one above, one below. And then I'm going to do the same thing from our other endpoint. Always keep track of which hole you're using if you're doing one of these slider compasses. That's the easiest thing to forget. Now, that's not something you're going to run into when you do constructions online, because once you set that compass, as long as you're careful to not change the width, you're good to go. You don't have the 2 different versions, the 2 different holes that you could use. There we go. Perfect perpendicular segment, or perpendicular line rather. Alrighty, if you need more examples, please do check out the additional videos. Again, they're using the other kind of compass. So they're using one of these more old school compasses, but it still runs through the steps and you can still track what you're doing with the marks that they're making, the different arcs, which are going to be in exactly the same places. But do let me know, as always, if you have any questions.